Dispatching all biters. My quest to free the country of zombies. By Mystic Alchemist. Copyright 2020 Mystic Alchemist. All rights reserved. Written in Australian English. This book is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places and incidents are either a product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual people living or dead, events or locales is purely coincidental. Chapter 5. Country Shopping. Spring Shore. While exploring the navigator, that town seemed to be on the right direction but off the main highway, so I set that as my next destination, the soothing voice offering directions as I drove. Turn left in 200. Straight 3 miles. This was easy, and also obvious. I was getting away from the heavily built-up places. Still my stomach wasn't settled and the hairs of my neck were up. Nothing was as I expected. No hordes of infected wandering the road and no other vehicles. It made me stand out like I had a target painted on my back. The further from the city I came, the smaller the road and the more obvious I felt. Maybe this had been a bad idea. Maybe staying on the main highway was the right thing to do, with more opportunities to blend in and hide. Off to my right a tractor was moving in a field, the sort of thing that happened in the country. Maybe there were other uninfected people still. That was something to look forward to. Spring Shore welcomes careful drivers. I was there, but there wasn't really much to look at, just a few shops facing the road. The sort of place you could miss if you blinked when you passed. But I didn't blink or drive through, for I was thinking ahead more than before and wanted to find some aluminium foil, the stuff you use for cooking, and I'd passed a general store that might have some. Parking was something I hadn't learnt yet, but I made a good attempt of turning around and stopping near that shop, certain there were no parking inspectors to check me. Trusty fire axe in hand, I made for the front door of the general store. It was an old-style lever catch, no automatic doors here, and with no sign of any infected waiting through the glass, I turned the latch and pushed the door open to the tingle of an old-fashioned bell above my head. Hiss, hiss. The bell had upset some inhabitants and they were approaching to investigate. Off to a side doorway, one older woman and behind her a young boy, both moaning and hissing toward me. The boy was ambling faster, and with me staying still, he came within axe range first. Hardly any effort needed to split his head in two, but for the first time, I felt a pang of distress as I did it. No such thought as I attacked the old woman. Her hissing was vicious and she was determined to bite me, her teeth loudly rattling together, making me think they must be false, and how could teeth like that infect me? Taking no chances, I sliced her head open, then stayed listening for any more trouble. In the silence, that woman's teeth kept coming to me, and I looked carefully at both the bodies for signs of bites. None. That meant they must have been infected directly, or else. What if they had all simply died of some other cause and then the zombie infection took over? I knew that however someone died, once they stopped breathing, after a time they would reanimate as a zombie. Everyone could end up as a zombie that way, they didn't need to be bitten first. There were more questions to be answered here, but I wasn't supposed to be thinking. I was here for foil. This place was perfect. No need to bother with big city emporiums. Here was everything a country person could want, all in a few compact shelves and table. 2 rolls of foil. Knives. Great stabbing knives as well as folding knives, one of those in each side pant pocket. Screwdrivers to replace the one I had to leave behind, and some spares. A thick country coat, not very fashionable, but warm to sleep in, and behind the counter, a radio. Not a modern digital one but an antique version, big and covered with dials. Possible of receiving stations from all around the world and made to work on batteries as well. It was plugged in, but I saw the battery hatch behind. D-type. There were batteries under the counter. I took a box. Certain there were more good things to salvage, but my car was small and I had as much as I could handle now. As I was dumping my first load into the car, the silence made it easy to hear. Definitely another vehicle approaching. All I could do was hide and wait for it to pass. Back inside, waiting in the general store and watching through the door until the vehicle came into sight. Cops. It was a police car, but the man inside was wearing the same black uniform those other people were wearing, and the car was stopping on the road, right alongside my car. This wasn't good. The man in black looking around, still inside the car, then he must have decided, because he opened the door and stood standing looking directly toward the general store, talking into something he had in his hand. I'd been sprung. As he came to the door, his face was hidden inside a black full-head helmet, and more importantly in my eyes, there was a pistol in his right hand pointed straight toward me, if he could see me. He saw the bodies, and he saw my bloody axe where I'd left it ready to take out, and he knew for sure someone was there, somewhere. In a game I always had a secret spell or a magic staff that spewed lightning, or there was a machine gun within reach, or maybe a grenade or two, or a wild animal to release, but here I had nothing. Well, not nothing, but a screwdriver up my belt and a pocket knife in my pants was not a fair counter for a large black gun pointed by someone who'd practiced it many times. "Come and show yourself," his commanding voice said. "I won't hurt you." I knew the only way to win in a fight like that was to strike fast and hard and before they realized where you were. I was behind the doorway to the small back room, just off the main entrance. He would be passing me in another step. I took out the folding knife from my right pocket and heaved it through the doorway and over into the side of the shop. He shot his gun twice toward the noise of that knife hitting the wall, giving me time to grab the screwdriver and launch myself toward his back, the screwdriver in my right hand aimed high for his neck, just below the bottom of his helmet, and my left hand reaching around his body to try to grab his gun. His neck was hard and didn't want to penetrate, and his body was squirming to get me. All I could do was work that screwdriver, pounding it in again and again until something clicked and it was into his neck deep. The gun went off again, the explosion hurting my ears, but I felt no other pain, and I was wriggling that screwdriver around and around, trying to do the maximum damage I could. His struggling against me was reducing, but he was still active. "Steve. You still there? Still with that runner?" The sound of his radio coming from his helmet, my ears so close I could hear it clearly, my hand on the screwdriver hot, and Steve making much less attempts to struggle against me. I risked backing away from him and reaming that screwdriver sideways and away from his neck. What a mess. I guessed all the blood that had been in his body was now over him and me and the floor. He certainly wasn't going to recover quickly now. I had a moment to stop and think. My mind felt sharp and ready for more, like I could take on a squad of invading troops and win single-handedly. I also knew that now I was a proven fugitive and Steve's mates would be ready to hunt me down. Steve was slumped down, head turned to one side and gun resting on his lap. Reaching out carefully, I took hold of it. I'd never even seen a real gun before, but I knew to prise his finger out of the trigger and get control of it myself. The weapon much heavier than I expected, but definitely worth keeping. Maybe I would work out where all the hidden levers were and how they worked. He'd shot 3 times, so there must be more bullets inside. I also knew that I needed to get away from here quickly. So much blood on my right hand and arm. There was a basin in the back room, and the water ran. Enough water for me to clean my arm and hands a bit and make me look a little less bloodthirsty. The remaining treasures thrown in my car, and I was driving away looking for somewhere to hide out for when Steve's mates came and began searching for me. Being the only vehicle moving in the area made me a very easy target. A farm near the road caught my fancy, and alongside the house was an open shed with a tractor and bales of hay and just enough room for my car to fit and look like it had always been there. I sat in the car watching and waiting. Watching for any activity around and waiting while my legs learned how to walk again. The shakes were bad this time. This was the first real person I'd killed. Sure, he would have killed me if I hadn't got him first, but that didn't make it any easier. While I sat in the seat, I went over in my mind the things I should have done. There would have been more ammunition in his police car and maybe bigger guns and radios. Having a channel into police communications would keep me ahead of them, but then nearly every radio these days sent its location back to base and they would be tracking me as I listened to them. And why did they want me dead? Surely they would be welcoming people that survived the infection. The only possible conclusion was that the infection was really an invasion meant to kill everyone but the select few, and I wasn't one of those. With my fire axe in hand I approached the farmhouse, still no sight of anyone at all until I rattled the doorknob. Then the moaning and hissing began. Like lambs to the slaughter they came through the door one by one after I'd released the latch. Slash, slash, slash. 6 in descending height. Both parents and 4 children, and all with signs of being bitten. I had to drag the bodies further away to clear the doorway, something you never needed to do in the games. The inside of the house stunk really bad and there was more blood around than I thought possible, and someone still live, even if they were a zombie. I found no living thing, and though my initial idea had been to spend the night here, the smell and blood drove me outside and into the fresh air. There were 2 yapping dogs in chains to one side and I was going to undo their chains until the first one nearly bit my hand off as I came close. At least a pen of chickens were more friendly when I let them free to feed. Time was passing and I was going nowhere. No screaming cars covered with flashing lights roaring past. No hand-to-hand search. No sirens in the distance. I'd eaten and cleaned myself again, and what else could I do? Slowly driving out the farmyard when I heard it, and it stopped me dead, the unmistakable thumping beat of a helicopter approaching. Car stopped. I cowered in the seat watching and waiting. They would most likely have heat sensing on board, but that wouldn't show if I was a zombie or me. Best thing was to not move. Movement always alerted them. The copter was following the road, big lump to one side for the sensors and the spotlight at night. Completely black, no identification at all, and the side door open and a machine gun framed in the opening, just like in the war games. It didn't even pause as it passed me, beating its way along the road toward the town. No doubt they're making a real effort to find me. If I'd taken Steve's radio I would be mince by now. At least I was learning how they worked. I considered my options while I waited for that chopper to completely disappear. The best thing would be to take down the helicopter. That would show them. The next best was to get as far away from here as quickly as I could, and the third best was to wait here until they gave up on me. I decided to run. As soon as it was clear I gunned that car out the track and made distance along the road, an eye in the rear mirror and not bothering with the destination until another town appeared in the windscreen. That town looked as big as the last, but I slowed my speed as it approached and took to looking for trouble as I moved. I saw no one living, but what I did see had me more worried than before, if that was possible. Piled in 3 places along the main street were piles of bodies. All in the same orientation as though someone had carried them and dropped them in the pile. I didn't stop, but by the time I passed the 3rd pile I was ready to soil my underwear. There was rage too. This town was being cleaned and made ready for someone to take over. A clean invasion. The population killed in a few days before they had time to move and cause damage. All the infrastructure left in place. All the buildings and transport ready to be reused. And it had been planned. Look at those trucks. Look at the people in black. All the communications infrastructure left in place and used against those who remained. GamerChick 747 had some idea of it before. That game had been sent out before it was finished, so a few would get an idea of how to fight the invasion. Maybe playing that game all weekend had protected me from getting the infection, and I knew enough about internet security to keep away from the obvious ways of being tracked. Maybe I was one of the few of the resistance, given the quest of taking the fight to the government and defeating their plans and making them pay for their treachery.